Hey everyone, my name is Darsh and welcome to Fremont Debate Academy. Today we'll be talking about flowing, or how to keep track of the debate. So this graphic really quickly just shows the concept of flowing. It says, like water, never stop flowing in your rounds. So you should always be writing things down. You should always be keeping track of what happens in the debate, and that'll give you the best chance of responding to your opponent's arguments and coming up with your own arguments in later speeches. So always be writing things down. So here's a flow sheet example we're sort of going to be referring back to several times in this video, and hopefully you guys can see my cursor right here. So basically I'm just going to take you through how to actually make this flow sheet work. You're going to have 6 columns, one for every single speaker, and starting with the proposition 1 speaker, you want to write down their definition because obviously that's super important for framing the round, and if you have problems with the definition, you can have it written down here word for word so you know what they said. Then you write down their 2 contentions and draw arrows to have refutes for each contention. You should have at least 1 refute per contention in order to make sure that you properly cover their case. Then you can move into your own contentions on the opposition. The opposition will have 2 contentions, and that space allows you to write down the opposition's contentions as well. Similarly, using arrows as before, you can write counter refutes to their refutes. So let's say you're the proposition 1 speaker, you give your contentions and they give refutes to it. The prop 2 speaker should be giving counter refutes to their refutes. And they should also be giving refutes to these assertions and these contentions that were brought up by the op 1 speaker. Then the proposition 2 speaker should be giving 2 contentions of their own. The opposition 2 speaker will do a similar thing where they have counter refutes, new refutes, and then sort of contentions that are brought up. And the opposition 2 speaker should also be extending anything that has sort of been dropped or not talked about and said, here is something that they have forgotten to mention in the past. Then the opposition 3 speaker comes right after opposition 2. So that's really important to keep in mind that there's this opposition block with the opposition 2 speaker, then opposition 3 speaker right afterwards. So the op 3 speaker is going to start by summarizing all of your side's points and summarizing all of the refutes, just to give the judge a clear picture of what's going on. It doesn't have to necessarily be every single thing, but it should be the key points of the debate. Then you should be going through your most important refutes and all of that and having it sort of laid out. And that's sort of the format that you'll put on your flow sheet, is you're going to have it laid out so you can have a proper summary. And then do a two-world analysis at the end, which is basically sort of comparing the impacts of the different sides if you were to take the best case scenario from your side and the worst case scenario from your opponent's side. The proposition 3 speaker has basically the same job, except they get to end the debate, which means the two-world analysis needs to be especially strong in order to beat this large opposition block here. So the prop 3 speaker needs to be especially good at flowing every single thing in this round, because if they forget something, they don't mention or refute that was brought up by the op 3 speaker, the judge might be like, why didn't you respond to that? And then they'll give them the loss. So every single thing needs to be written down. So some tips on how to make your flow good and how to keep it all neat, organized, and tidy. First of all, use arrows. Use arrows to show refutations of certain points. Make sure you indicate these arrows and make sure you have the refutations there. You can sort of section them off, draw lines between refutations if you need to. Just make sure to have big, bold arrows with big arrowheads to keep track of where you are. The second thing you can do is use circles. So use circles to mark points that went unrefuted, that were not responded to, and emphasize these as dropped points. So what's a drop point? It's basically when your opponents don't respond to something, and if your opponents drop a point, they basically are agreeing with your side, because what it means is they couldn't even think a response to your contention because it was so good. That must mean that the logic is very sound, and therefore every single person in the debate agrees that it is a good point, which means the judge should be saying that you win on that point. You can sort of point that out and describe the importance of a drop point as well. But to do that, you should be marking these things with circles in order to remember that they're there. Thirdly, make sure to actually highlight certain things to draw emphasis or attention to your biggest points or impacts. This is super important for the opposition 3 and proposition 3 speakers. You remind yourselves to emphasize these points or impacts during the last speech and during the two-world analysis, but this can honestly be useful for any one of the speakers in order to highlight certain parts of the case or to highlight certain things that you have to refute and you want to remember. Don't trust yourself to remember every single small piece of information. Even though you might be smart enough for that to happen, you don't want to risk it, so you should always be writing these things down. The good way to do that is to highlight. And then the fourth tip is to use colors. So use two sides. Use 2 colors, one per side. Normally you have black for proposition and red for opposition. So if you see onto our flow sheet example, you might have noticed that it was black for proposition, red for opposition. That's a super easy way to remember which side is which and will allow you to sort of keep track of things during your speech itself. Because if everything is in the same color, it's all going to blend together. So when you're going and looking up and down from your judge back to your paper to the judge while giving your speech, you're going to forget where you are. So you can have these different colors in order to mark things differently. And again, you can use more colors than that if you want, but it's advisable to use highlighters at that point. Okay, so if you guys want to sort of use this as a reference, you can copy down this flowsheet example. This is going to be applicable to all of your debates going forward. Thank you, and if you learned something, please subscribe and like, and I'll see you next time.